All right, welcome everybody around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. Now, I have shared this information a few times before on my channels over the years. I made a video recently, but it ended up being about an hour long. Excuse me. So I really want to keep this to about half an hour tonight. So please keep in mind, I normally it takes about up to an hour to describe everything in detail, so I'll have to speed through everything here. But I think this is very, very important information for ufology and for everybody in light of the coming disclosure, the disclosure that's in the works, and the reveals that are coming. So we've heard rumors that certain nations may be communicating with, to whatever degree, with reptilians that's suddenly come out recently. How true that is or not, don't need to get into it. But what I wanted to share here today, this information is one of the only, and I feel that can be fairly said, that it's one of the only credible cases describing encountering a reptilian ET. Okay? And it's still open for debate whether these beings are actually from this earth, in which case they're not actually extraterrestrial. But nonetheless, for lack of better understanding a term, we'll just call it reptilian ET. Now, why do I say it's one of the only credible? Sounds like a pretty egotistical claim to make. Well, I've been researching in ufology for about 25 years now. I'm not new to the game. And and many others will tell you, any credible source will tell you that there's very little information about reptilians out there. There's a lot of wild claims and speculation, but in terms of things that are credible, credible abduction cases or encounters, or documentation or material or whistleblowing information is very, very little. We do know that one of the four main types or species of extraterrestrials is said to be reptilian. Even Mr. Davis, I think it's Eric Davis, but in either case, Mr. Davis came out and said that recently, once again, reiterated it. We all knew this before that, anyways, but it's great to see a person of that position to come out and acknowledge it. But nonetheless, with all this buzz in the background, we could very well be told one day what a lot of us already know, that reptilians are real. Okay, whether they come from the stars or from this earth, that's another question for another day. Okay, but there's so much wild speculation and claims out there, such as from David Icke. I've owned two of his books for decades, hundreds of pages of material. I've read it all. Not impressed with it whatsoever. It's very disappointing. And there's so much speculation and imagination and claims about reptilian encounters. They're just wild and fantastical. And they're heavily tied to, you know, certain types of dark conspiracies. But like I said, in terms of credible encounters or abductions or information, is very, very little. It's minimal. That's why I think it's very, very important for me to share this encounter. And the other reason I feel that I can fairly say it's credible is because I'm the one who went through this experience. And I'm not here fooling myself or anybody else. One reason I always take the testimony down every time I put it up is because, I feel ignorant having a video talking about that. But it is a very real experience that I went through. I was forced to go through. I didn't choose to go through it. It happened to me. I was victim to it, you could say, although I found it very interesting. I wasn't really afraid during the experience, but nonetheless, it was something that I went through myself. It did not occur when I was asleep. It didn't occur when I was laying down. It didn't occur when I was meditating. Nothing like that whatsoever. It did not occur while I was remote viewing. This was something, as I'll explain, happened instantaneously and was a tangible physical experience. It was not visionary, imaginary. It didn't take place in the astral plane or anything like that there. This was a very, very real experience. And for it to be so real unto all my senses, even tangible, if it was not real, I would be highly surprised, right? So, in this experience, this took place about 20 something years ago when I was much younger, but still an adult. But nonetheless, at that time in my life, I had become very good at remote viewing and some other related things. I won't go further into that, but I do have a lot of experience and success with remote viewing. I was very good at it when I did it. And I can distinguish between remote viewing experiences and this experience with the reptilian, and they are totally different. If this was a product of remote viewing, I would have absolutely no problem saying that, thinking that to myself, because during my remote viewing sessions, I had extraterrestrial experiences. I went places, I saw them, and so forth. But for me, I put all of those in the basket of what happened when remote viewing. This is not a episode of remote viewing. Okay, so what happened was the second that I closed my eyes, and I wasn't laying down, I sat down on a chair. And the second that my eyes closed, just like blink shut, but I did intend to close my eyes, but the second they shut, I was instantly taken and I was somewhere else. The taking almost didn't even happen. It was just instantaneously I was somewhere else. And all in my eyes open, all the world, everything around me was a totally different place. I was no longer where I just was a second ago. Right? That happened against my will. I wasn't desiring to go somewhere. I wasn't remote viewing, anything like that there. I wasn't meditating. I was wide awake. It literally just shut my eyes for a split second and then bam. So that is highly unusual, but also made it a lot more real. Uh, the place that I was in, like I said, was tangible. All the senses there, sight, smell, sound. It was immersive. You could feel the atmosphere, everything. Walking on the ground, everything. It was a very real experience. This can't always be said with remote viewing. Remote viewing, usually, not always, but usually you're just visually looking at something. Sometimes you can detect other things as well. It depends on exactly what you're doing, but I'm not here to talk about that. But this here was, I was instantaneously in a place that was tangibly real life. I was really tangibly, physically there. This wasn't, I was in the spirit or anything like that there. I was there. And all the senses around me, all my senses were, relaying to me this atmosphere and environment that was around me as being real. So I was startled. And it was inside of a gigantic cavern. I didn't measure anything. I don't know how big it is exactly, but I've always said it was probably between, maybe a half mile, maybe a mile wide, something like that. Perhaps roughly the same height. But the top half of this, cavern is what I could see. I was at that level about halfway up. The bottom half, so to speak, was, you know, at this drop off, and then it dropped off over this ledge and it went down the rest of the depth. And I'm only estimating it was about half and half, right? That I was about halfway up. Um, the lower half was very, very dark and it was very hard to see. I could see that there were some lights and it looked like a little city or a town or something down there, maybe more than one. But at my level, ground level, if you want to call it that, I was standing on like what looked like at first a completely natural rocky feature inside of a cave, like a giant cavern, just like a rocky shelf that runs along the side of the cavern. I don't know if it ran all the way around, but the side that I was on, there was like this shelf, 10, 20 feet wide, whatever it is, built into the side of the cavern and extending out from it. So there's a huge drop off. Looking down, it may have dropped down a quarter mile, half a mile, something like that, into darkness. And I'm afraid of heights. So I was quite afraid that, if I stand far enough from an edge, I'm okay. That doesn't bother me. It's only when I get close and look over an edge. But I did, get somewhat near the edge to take a look down, and that's when I could see the lights down. So I could roughly gauge that this was an absolutely massive place. And this rocky shelf uh, basically turned into, I'm not saying by magic, but it became this rocky like natural bridge, kind of like a natural rocky archway you would see in a cavern where you could walk across the arch. It was like that, and it wasn't technologically designed. It was like natural features, but as if somehow there was some very crude or minimal, uh, purposely done minimal manipulation of the features. And across this little causeway or archway, whatever you would want to call it, that you could walk across this stony bridge, which was really, I think, just a natural feature. there are these little rocky pinnacles rising up here and there, not consistently, but these little pinnacles added a little degree of like visual safety. Like, okay, I can walk across this stone arch, bridge, whatever you want to call it, and there's at least a few pinnacles here that help me feel like I'm cushioned in, or I could grab if I slip. The rock of this bridge and walkway was very dark, like not black, but a dark color, and a lot of angular features, like pointy and jagged. Not everything was smooth and rounded out. Anyways, so the bridge was maybe, I don't know, I'm just guessing 30 or 50 feet long. It wasn't a long bridge, and then it connected back over to another portion of shelf that it kept extending down the side of the cavern. As it got further away, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred feet or so off in the distance, I could see that it disappeared into like a little tunnel that was kind of like in the side of the wall of the cavern, right? So you could see the mouth, this dark mouth of an opening. And out of that mouth was walking what looked like a person. And the person, hundreds of feet away from me at that time, I couldn't make out what they looked like, their size, but they came up, they kept walking, they walked across the stone bridge thing, they walked towards me. So they got across the bridge, they got to the shelf that I was on, they came up to me. But as they were coming, getting closer, I could see that this person was abnormally tall, and they were wearing a cloak. That was the other immediate thing, like a very silk looking type cloak, like silk type material. But anyways, as they got closer, the features became more apparent. Anyways, long story short, because I have to speed this description up, at whatever distance it was, I could tell that they were not human, and that they were also very, very tall. I could only guess between 7 to 9 feet tall, which is what I usually always say. They are much taller than me. They weren't super massive, bulky, like muscular, and they were not scrawny. They weren't even, I would say, average build, maybe a little bit above average, like got some muscle to them, but not like big, big hulking type body. So they looked very fit, very athletic, very, very strong, very, very powerful. I couldn't see much of the body because I was wearing this cloak. It had a hood on it, so I couldn't. I could only see the face and the arms basically as it got near to me. I don't remember paying attention much to the feet. I can't remember if it was wearing shoes or if it had bare feet. I don't ever recall seeing a tail or wings whatsoever. I don't think there was any room for that, and I think that if this being had a tail or wings, I would have seen them. It just looked, as I got closer, I could see it wasn't human, but up until I got fairly close, it just looked like a tall person wearing a hooded cloak. But anyways, when I got close enough where I could see the skin in detail, I noticed that this, well, the skin was jet black, uh, but it wasn't human skin. As it got closer, I could see that it kind of looked like lizard type skin, like the underbelly of a lizard, where the scales are very, very soft and it's almost like silk, very, very fine scales. And so the skin looked very, very smooth, looked amazing, looked beautiful. And but on top of that, it had a chromatic color shift effect. So the default color of the skin was jet ink black, like glossy jet ink black, and not super high gloss, but like had a sheen to it. And as the muscles rippled, the muscles in the bone as it walked, just from the face, the neck, and the arms, I could see that it was color shifting. So, like what a peacock would do, or like oil on water, that chromatic color shift effect. And it was amazing looking. It looked absolutely spectacular. I've never seen anything like it, especially on a living being. So, anyways, as I got, even the face was doing that. So, the skin that I could see resembled that. And I don't remember what the fingers looked like, unfortunately, right? I don't remember if it had claws or what. But anyways, the face is more important. And as it got up to me, I could see that, it was towering over me. And the face looked like a human, generally human shaped skull, but slightly different looking features. So when you looked at it, you could immediately tell that is certainly not human whatsoever. But the skull under the skin is quite similar to us, right? The cheekbones were more prominent. I'm not going to compare to what it could look like, with different racial groups or ethnic groups, whatever you want to call it, on the earth, because there's lots of different people with prominent cheekbones. I'm not comparing this being to that. I'm just saying that it had unique type cheekbones that stood out as a little bit different from what I'm familiar with in my day-to-day life. And its eyes weren't big, they weren't tiny. They're, roughly proportionally like what our eyes would be, but they weren't human eyes whatsoever. And they kind of had, I'm not going to say they were in slits or on angles, but there's something to them that just gave the eyes this kind of like serpent like or even viper like look. Looked pretty cool, to be honest. And the eyes were a yellow color. I used to get confused if it was yellow or orange, but I do remember it was yellow. I was thinking about this earlier before doing the video. So yellow eyes. In terms of pupils and this and that there, I cannot remember. I don't think it was just a solid yellow eyeball, but I can't say for sure. But there was yellow, like a canary type yellow. So in terms of teeth, I do not remember. The face of the being, it didn't have a reptilian type muzzle or snout or anything like that there, but it did not have a human nose and mouth and like lower half of the face. Like that was no. So the skull was roughly human shaped, pretty much very similar to human. The only real tangible differences besides what the skin looked like were, the eyes, the positioning, and the angle or the shape of the eyes. Basically, the eyes. Cheekbones are a little bit different, but could be similar to a lot of different peoples on the earth. The only other thing about the face that looked that different was the nose and the mouth. So there was no muzzle, no snout, but it wasn't like ours. So it's hard to describe, but it's like if you put your hand over your face, there's like that there. That doesn't do it justice, but a very snug extra like layer here on top of what we have, with no nose that looks like any racial group on our Earth. So it doesn't have like a human nose whatsoever. Um, had nostrils, but it's just hard to describe. But it looked very very humanish, right? So, anyways, that's what it looked like. Let me check my time there. Not bad for time. So that's the visual description of the being itself. Because it was wearing that cloak, I couldn't see the rest of the body. The cloak itself, kind of in ode to what the being's actual body could do with the chromatic effect, the silken robe that the being was wearing, or this cloak, sorry, was also chromatic, but it was like chromatic over the whole material. So it looked very beautiful and stunning as this being's walking towards me, and like the silken material is like wafting around, and every time it ripples and moves, like the chromatic colors are just you know escalating up, and shimmering and changing color. It's just amazing, and even the skin as the being is walking towards me and moving. The other thing I wanted to mention is that whether the following was because purely of its own biology or because of technology or technologically assisted biology, I don't know. But as the being got towards me, closer to me, I would like to say, and I think anybody else would as well, that it felt like and seemed like it had an immensely powerful mind that was so powerful and telepathic that it was just like radiating or emanating this energy, force, power, whatever you want to call it. There's something tangible that was permeating a distance from it. And as I got closer to you, the intensity of whatever it is, I don't even know what to call it. It's not an energy or force. I don't know what it is, but you feel it and it intensifies. And as the being got toward closer to me, I could just immediately tell from that sensation, from what I was detecting, and with my human senses bewildered, trying to grasp what was going on, I could just sense that it could cripple me with its mind. It could pick me up and throw me over this edge down to the bottom of the cavern if it wanted to, without even touching me. Now, whether the being had that ability or not, I don't know. Whether it was trying to fool me into thinking it had that ability, I don't know. Might be able to do that with some technology. Maybe it has a device that could do that. I don't know. Anything's possible. But going by what I experienced, and all I can do is go by my own senses, and that's what it felt like. And as it got closer to me, I'm pretty sure it was the mind. But like I said, whether it had some type of artificial assistance, I don't know. But that's irrelevant here now. But the mind, like as it, if you picture like a almost like radiation, you have like this aura that's at a set distance around the center point, and it radiates out, and that's getting closer to you, right? So that that radiation or whatever you want to call it, it's intensifying, intensifying, intensifying. So then the being standing right here, it's talking to me, and the full intensity is just like over. So if you can picture it like that way, describing it illustratively, at that point there, you feel like powerless. Not that it paralyzed me, not that it did anything like that to me. The being was, I like to say, cordial. It was professional. It was cordial. Those are the best words. I can't say that it was kind and I don't want to say it wasn't polite. It was cordial, right? That's just the best way to put it. It was a very, very, very serious demeanor. But I felt powerless in the sense that I could only, revere at its dominance. It is supreme dominance, like just absolute dominance. I'm not saying it's omnipotent. I'm saying it had supreme dominance over me as a being. And I just had to give in to that. There's no point fighting it. That's what I mean. So there's a level of power to these beings, whether they themselves have it or technology, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. But they're powerful. That's another important element that I wanted to relay. Another important element, please don't forget, is that this being treated me cordially. Okay, it was not disrespectful. It was not harsh. It was not trying to be menacing. It looked, many would call it menacing, but they're being prejudiced based upon its looks, right? But it was very intimidating. The being was very serious. It was very powerful. So of course it's going to be intimidating, but the being wasn't being menacing to me. And I think all of these understandings and reflections are very important. So, anyways, it was speaking to me and showing me things with its telepathy, and it could talk in the language, in its own language, in my language, if it wanted, mix it up, do anything. But its primary and highest and best language that it used was this one that was like images and forms, very complex, not like simplified things like we'd be used to, like super intense mathematical, like very intense things, and not fractals, but similar to fractals, but completely abstract things that have some type of mathematical geometric type art to them. But yet, and they're moving, and if anybody else would look at it, they would think, "What the heck is that?" But maybe the being was assisting my understanding of it. I don't know. Maybe because I was in the field of that emanation, I was rendered able to understand it. I don't know, but it's interesting to ponder on these things. But it was showing me all of this complexity moving and all these shapes, things, super hyper complex shapes. But it wasn't like looking at a fractal, right? Big difference. But it was relaying things. It was, I could look at what was transpiring and understand it. So it was a form of higher language, but humans can't understand that on their own. There's just no way; it's impossible. But if that's a glimpse into how this being and how these beings, how powerful their minds actually are and how they operate, that's astounding. They could have IQs off the scale, like we wouldn't even be able to fathom, right? That's like almost like to the point where they could think and calculate things hyperdimensionally. I'm just throwing that out there, but like just to a degree that just we can't even fathom, much greater than ours, right? Where you can condense so much more information in a tiny parcel of data and just stream all of this, whereas we're like going by one little bit by bit by bit, one and zero, one and zero. In contrast, this thing here is just like streaming gigabytes of information that's, relaying stuff all at one time. Huge difference. They are superior. So, anyways, the being led me up the shelf that I was on, continued along the side of the cavern, kind of went up a little bit. So we walked along there. It was talking the whole time. I unfortunately do not remember anything it was telling me, maybe because most of it was in that super complex higher language. But nonetheless, it did say a lot of things to me on our lower level of understanding, like earth language and whatever. But I don't remember any of it. The only thing I remember is something I'll tell when I get to it. So, anyways, it led me up this little shelf, and again, the shelf's built into the side of the cavern. Oh, and the other thing I forgot to mention is that the cavern was like a gloomy illumination level. It wasn't still doing pretty good for time. Uh, it had like this ambrish, fiery type ambient light. I don't know where the light source was or what it was. It kind of seemed to me, but I could be wrong, that it was just like some type of natural source of light. They gave off this like ambrish, gentle fiery orange type hue, but it wasn't illuminated. It wasn't bright white light or yellow light or anything like that. There, it's kind of like that. It was kind of gloomy, but you could see very well in the cavern, right? But anyways, but it was dark enough in there that when you look down, like I said, the bottom half of the cavern, like from the lip of the edge of this shelf and walkway downwards, that was very dark. That might give a clue as to where the light source is coming from. I don't know. But nonetheless, and also it's important, the little city that was illuminated down there with its own lights, it did not give off enough light to illuminate the bottom of the cavern, right? So, anyways, so we're going up the slight rise up, a little bit higher up, continuing on the shelf built into the edge of the cavern. Well, that's naturally part of the edge of the cavern. And then there's like a little outcrop that juts out, like a little ledge that sticks out. And on this little ledge, there's a little natural, like stalagmite or whatever, stalactite, pinnacle type thing right here. And the being, which I sensed was a male, was leading me to it. So he leads me up there, and then I'm like standing behind him or beside him, not in front of him at any time, I'm pretty sure. And I watched as we got close to that little steeple type thing. I noticed that the top of it, you couldn't see really from any other angle, but the top was like shaved down. And I don't know if it was polished like marble, but we could picture something like that. Like you get a marble countertop that's like smooth finish. Well, the top was kind of like that. But the rest of it was just like the natural stalagmite, stalactite thing or whatever. And but on this smoothed out panel top were like controls, like little weird. I can't remember exactly what they were, but they weren't like switches and this and that. They were dials. It was like buttons, but they weren't big fat buttons that you press. It was probably like a touch screen type thing. There's a little display panel, control panel there. Anyway, so the being made a few quick movements on the panel, and then I could hear this noise, like this sparking type noise, and I look up and there's this like bright light that's occurring, and right out there in the middle of the cavern, right, so floating like at our eye level in the middle of the cavern, so maybe half a mile up from the bottom or whatever, maybe, or quarter mile or whatever it is, and likewise quarter or half a mile from the top of the cavern, right there in the center is a little burst of light, and then it looked like origami of light just like unfolding, kind of like a paper snowflake, like you make those snowflakes with paper, like the paper dolls, like that. But if you got all the paper snowflakes and stuck them together into a sphere shape, and then somehow folded that up into origami, and then it popped out by itself. So if you picture that, that's kind of like what it was like. And but as it came out, it basically turned into this giant screen. It's probably made of like energy or hold on. Shh. Stop. Stop your noise. If someone's home, I'm gonna have to redo this video, which is gonna irritate me. So let me just check real quick. There's nobody here. Why are you making all that noise? Stop your noise. Anyway, so let me get this wrapped up real quick. I'm still doing all right for the 30-minute mark. So uh, it unfolded like light origami into this projection type screen, like a holographic screen or whatever it was, and it started to play out all these like videos, like movies of things occurring, like video footage, and it looked to be like it was filmed from like a little drone, and this was 20 something years ago. I don't even think we had drones back then. But it was like it was filmed from a drone, like 50 or 100 feet up in the air or whatever, something like that, maybe a little bit higher. And it was just a lot of bad things that humanity has done. Most of them were like wars and conflicts, things like that, things of a grander scale. Didn't I'm pretty sure the being wasn't bothering to show me petty theft or carjacking, stuff like that. But it was like it kept showing this montage, and it was real. It looked real, absolutely real, like real events from human history, from all these different epochs of time, different, you know, civilizations of people, everything. And I remember seeing some people. I always famously say that they looked like Vikings. They had like the fur and the armor and like horns on the helmets and all this and that. There, all sorts of different types of people. A lot of them, ancient or back, hundreds or thousands of years ago, for all I know. But they looked rustic, right? So all this conflict and wars and seeing all the violence and the brutality because it's just being filmed from like this little drone thing, and axes, clubs, maces, and everything pummeling each other, and just absolutely hard to watch all of this transpiring. And you're seeing it fairly close. Like you can make out the people, you can almost see faces on people, but it was high enough where it was like you're looking at armies of like little army men or ants or bugs going at each other, right? Um, so it showed me that montage for however long it was. I don't know, minutes, half an hour. I don't know. I didn't time it. But it was a fair amount of footage. It wasn't just like a few things. Anyways, at some point during that process or when he had wrapped it up, he told me one thing. He was probably talking the whole time, but I can't remember. But the one thing he did say that I did vividly remember and I will never forget was he told me that humans on this earth, sorry, that humans are like vermin on this earth. And I've always said, I don't know if he said like vermin or that we are vermin. One of the two, either is not good to hear, but they view us like vermin on the earth, right? And vermin are basically, I don't have time to go pull out the dictionary again like I did last time, but vermin, as you know, bugs, rats, mice, they carry diseases. Humans do, right? We spread diseases around the planet. Yes, we do. That's what vermin does. Vermin reproduce in high numbers and overpopulate certain areas. Huge cluster of like bugs, roaches, rats, mice. You know what I mean? Pest creatures and everything. They're nuisances. So they're destructive. They eat crops. So these are like the core identifying, defining factors of what makes something vermin. So for them to view us as vermin, and now honestly speaking, it might have just been his singular opinion. That wasn't my takeaway from it, but um, I think it's fair to consider at least that his kind view us as vermin and not just him, the individual. But nonetheless, he was cordial to me. He was not, putting me down. He wasn't that I remember. I remember the interaction I had with it. That at no point did I feel threatened, like I was scared for my life or that it would do something bad to me. It was a very serious, it's like if you bumped into a mafia boss one day, but you happen to have, nothing bad happened. You just bumped into them and, you had a good time and maybe, the little respectful exchange of communication type of thing. You know what I mean? You go on about your business and you don't need to think about each other again. That type of thing. You're with momentarily, maybe you're in line at McDonald's behind a mafia boss, strike up a little conversation because you don't know he's a mafia boss. This is what I mean, right? Just so you get an idea. Someone who's dead serious, like super serious, who could destroy you if they wanted to, but at that time they're just being cordial to you. You know what I mean? That's how I can help relay that experience. So anyways, that's what it told me, that humans are like vermin on this earth, or that humans are vermin on this earth. Obviously if it said we are vermin, that's more harsh, has more dire implications, but nonetheless, soon after that I was sent back and I was instantly back where I came from. Got up off my chair, bewildered. So that was the experience. Like I said, it was not asleep. I was not laying down. I was not dreaming. I was not meditating. I was not remote viewing. I literally sat on a chair, closed my eyes, and instantly I was taken here against my will. So I I have never seen a reptilian being that looks like that in any type of science fiction movies, anything that I can recall or think of. Nothing comes close to resembling that. Um, Not even what was his name? Uh, Dr. Reed, was it? Yeah, but anyways, long story short, it looks so different from anything else. But anyways, very very interesting, and I think that people need to take this seriously, this account, because, like I said, there's very few, if any, credible accounts of reptilians out there, and I have nothing to gain by sharing my experience. So I just wanted to share this information for the sake of ufology, and in light of the fact that we're getting disclosure, and reptilians are said to be one of the four main uh, classes of extraterrestrials. So they could actually be from this Earth. We don't know. You never know. It's entirely possible. But nonetheless, these reptilians. I won't get into this now because I don't have time, and I actually made my 30-something minute mark, so I'm happy. But the this reptilian being is a almost identical fit to what the Nahash, the Nagas, the serpent people were like from various different mythologies around the world, whether it be the Hebrew, even the Hindu, many different ones. It's very, very similar in description. The Testament of Omron describes it being similar, the Nahash being similar to the being that I experienced. It says that it's a cloak of many colors. Doesn't say that it changes color, but it says that it's a cloak of many colors. Has a dark visage, so a dark appearance. Didn't say its skin changed color like I saw, but the one I saw had jet black skin that changed color. And it said that it had a face like a viper. So that's a Nahash being described in the Testament of Omron. The Nahash were bipedal, intelligent, superior intelligent humanoid beings that existed alongside mankind in ancient times. And other cultures around the world spoke about them as well. So if they're real and they're from Earth, this is something serious that I'll end on. If they're from our Earth, they must be older than us. They must be older than humanity, than Homo sapiens. Whether we evolved here or were created here, it really is immaterial, because even according to the creation story, if you want to be biblical, they were here arguably, well, they were definitely here alongside the first people, but arguably you could also say they're here before them, because everything else was created and then man was created. So they were here before us, whether you're looking at it biblically or on an evolutionary. So whether by creation or by evolution, I believe in both. But nonetheless, doesn't matter. They had to be here, and they were here first. If reptilian beings did evolve or get put here on our planet, they would have had. If let's say they evolved from the dinosaurs, there were dinosaurs that were roughly, somewhat intelligent, like the same as a chicken or a parrot. The intelligence level of a young human child, which is quite impressive when you think about it. And we don't know how much smarter these beings, these dinosaurs were back then. And they were the avian types, like the oviraptors and such. But nonetheless, they were bipedal, roughly human size, some of them bigger. But we already had human sized bipedal reptilian beings, creatures back then, with the intelligence level of a young human child, a few years old or so, maybe even 4, 5, or 6 if you're lucky. They already had that like 100 million plus years ago. They've had a lot more time to evolve than humans have. Okay, they were here before primates and monkeys and apes were. They were here tens of millions, or if not hundreds of millions of years before that. It's entirely possible that a little enclave of them survived the various different ice ages and meteor strikes and whatever that occurred that caused all these global extinctions. We've had like 4 or 5 massive global extinctions where like 95 to 99% of all life went extinct, but yet here everything is now because life survives and finds a way. So, likewise, it is not impossible, and it's silly for science to say that it would be impossible that intelligent reptilian humanoids could have evolved, because they were already right there. Oviraptors, bipedal, had two long front forearms that they used like we do, like hands. They had dexterous fingers that could grasp and pick up things. They'd use them to pick up eggs and such. Okay, this prime candidates, many different types of dinosaurs, even dinosaurs are in that category that had the dexterity and everything, bipedalism, and good degree of intelligence. They're good at running and possibly even climbing and such. They're very, very nimble. They weren't big lumbering behemoths. So it's very possible. And if they did evolve here and maybe they survived in some cavern system through an ice age and they just got used to it and they developed technology and receded back into the cavern system. Maybe they've been through all these different extinction events, or a few of them, or just many meteor strikes and things that have happened on the Earth, like solar flares and whatnot. And they've just taken up home in underground, undersea, inside a mountain base, all these different options. that are entirely possible. We live on a planet where 70% of the surface is water, only 30% of the surface is land. And of that 30%, which is land, the vast majority, well, a large majority of that 30%, humans don't even inhabit. Okay, humans only inhabit, I have the number saved somewhere, I think it was like 10 or 15% at best of the Earth's surface is inhabited by humans. So, for anybody to say it's impossible for these beings to be here, to have lived here, to have evolved here, is not impossible. In ancient times, the ancient peoples said that they were amongst us. It's only in the last few thousand years, or maybe even just the last few hundred years, where their numbers died off, or maybe their technology rose to the level where they could, just remain out of sight and do whatever it is that they want to do. So it's definitely not impossible. They also could have evolved, gotten to the point of technology where they could have left the planet, maybe gone to the moon, set up a base there, or just went to another planet somewhere else. Maybe they returned here and just continuing study here on the other life forms that came after them. Many different interesting scenarios. But let me get going. So hit the 40-minute mark. Thank you all for coming by, folks. I'll read the comments later. I don't read the live chats as I go. Otherwise, it throws me off my short-term memory and my train of thought, and then I end up forgetting what I was saying and blah blah blah. So in case you're wondering, because you're new, I believe. But anyways, thank you all for coming by. Take care, folks. God bless. See you all later.